Interactive. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand over my microphone to Richard.
Hey guys, my name is Richard Kim. I'm a general partner at Galaxy Interactive. We're currently investing our third fund. We have over 800 million of AUM dedicated 100% to investing in gaming studios and infrastructure across both Web 2 and Web 3 titles. Akshay, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Akshay. I'm one of the co-founders of Halliday. We are building the next generation of onboarding and growth for Web3 games. So excited about abstracting away the blockchain, making games as seamless and easy of an experience for players to just jump in and get started playing.
So I wanted to talk today about the infrastructure needed to build an open economy game. And my choice of words here is actually quite intentional because often you hear of Web3 gaming. But to me, that actually presumes a conclusion that I think is worth digging into a bit as to why everyone has assumed that crypto is necessarily the way to bring open economies to virtual worlds and games. So I guess we'll start the discussion there, right? So I think, Akshay, you and I kind of discussed a bit, and I think we're both, and probably everyone in this room, is broadly aligned with this vision that open economies in gaming and virtual worlds make sense. But as we know, crypto comes with a ton of challenges, right? So maybe talk to me a bit about what your core view is on the role of crypto in bringing open economies, and I can kind of share my thoughts on the same topic.
Yeah, definitely. I think blockchain is a very useful and interesting tool to build open economies on top of. But I'm not going to go out there and say that it's the only tool. I think it just happens to be a very awfully convenient tool and probably marginally better than whatever else is available to build these. What's great about blockchain is that it has all the fundamental principles you need to build open economies on top of. It's trustless. It's decentralized. It fundamentally stores your property rights, so no one can challenge who owns what. And it has all those basic qualities you need on which new things can be developed and people can start working together, creating these open worlds, open economies, and honestly a new form of trade and capitalism that can develop.
Yeah, I mean, in kind of my day job, I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of game studios about both their present aspirations around building Web3 games, but also just the history of experiments in trading and open economies in games like Diablo 3 with the auction house, in various MMOs that have had various forms of trading. And one of the consistent points of feedback I get, particularly from the public company CEOs, is you don't need crypto to do that. Right? In fact, crypto doesn't actually solve some of the hardest problems in this space around, for example, making sure you're not violating gambling rules, right? Or making sure that you do KYC and AML for real money conversions. So, I think when we talk about infrastructure, before we talk about the how of building, open economy games, I think it's worth talking for 5 minutes on why, right? Because it's pretty apparent that we're going to go through a ton of brain damage to bring open economies to games. So maybe let's talk a bit about the types of games that we think it's worth going through the headache for. Maybe you can share some thoughts, and I'll add mine.
Yeah. So right now, if you explore the universe of Web3 games, every single genre is being tried. Every single type of game is trying to be built, and people are exploring all over because it's not certain what type of game is going to work best here. It's a serious process of experimentation right now. You're seeing things from these real world money games. You're seeing gambling games. You're seeing FPS, MMOs, RPGs. Like everything under the sun is being tried out right now. And that's just the type and genre of game. There's more along what platform. There's mobile, PC, console. Everything's being tried here. I would definitely say that some types of games are more suited for Web3 than others. I think that for a bunch of types of games, Web3 does make sense in one way or another. There's something you can build. There's a more user-focused content generation platform you can develop out of that. But I think the type of game that I'm most excited about for Web3 is the type of game where the community itself is going to generate a lot of content. We're starting in gaming today, but the vision of Web3 in gaming has really been even more than gaming about virtual worlds and what we like to call digital civilization at Halliday. It's the idea that people are going to generate their own experiences, own content, and it's something that one centralized company, no matter how big it is, I don't care if it's Apple, which is the biggest company in the world, like they don't have enough of the resources to do this. Meta just tried, it didn't go that well, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately for the space, who knows? But the idea of blockchain in this space is that we can align incentives, we can create the fundamental infrastructure for people to come in, create content on top of, and really come in and create a shared new form of world. So, I mean, Richard and I were just talking earlier as Nexon building MapleStory. Like, this is the perfect type of game to build on top of Web3. And super excited to see where they take it, super excited to see some of the other types of games that are building on top here, too.
Yeah, like in my own head, as I kind of narrowed down the types of titles I want to spend my time reviewing, in my head, it's first betting games. And the reason why is I think what most crypto games lack is the idea of organic payer demand, right? In my head, I think about this ratio all the time of if the numerator is the communal weight of expectation on your project price going up, and the denominator is organic payer demand. So by that I mean, what's going to get someone to buy the token or NFT, irrespective of the price of the thing. So abstract away all the speculation. And in crypto, broadly speaking, both in NFT space and gaming space, that ratio is way too high, right? The ratio of expectation to organic payer demand is too high. And so betting is very interesting to me because in Web2 gaming, one of the largest categories is what's known as skill-based gaming. The idea that I put $1, you put $1, the house takes 10 to 15% in these quick hit casual matchups. That solves your organic payer demand problem, right? Because there's always a reason to be buying more things to bet on. Now contrast that with something like an Axie style, PvE, play to earn. And so, I look back at the last 5 years of blockchain gaming, I'm like, man, we've been building all the wrong types of games here, right? I think, to Akshay's point, the kind of creator universe type of games where NFTs and tokens are used to incentivize community creation on top of some shared IP that people actually care about is super interesting, which is why we've shifted a lot of our focus to Korea and Japan as interesting areas because of the kind of, especially in the anime space and other areas of like strong fandom for pre-existing IP. And then I think this third category for which probably 0.1% of projects are going to be successful, but is actually quite intellectually exciting, which is the idea of like a truly virtual world. Like I think what Hilmar is doing with Eve is a great example of this, right? He's thinking about it as I'm creating an entirely new universe with an entirely new digital physics for which there will be this kind of independent currency to govern whatever it is that's built in this universe, right? And he has the 20 years, this year they're holding Eve Fest later this month in Iceland, and it's going to be the 20th year anniversary of that. And that's actually incredible if you think about it, right? Like how many blockchain games have been operating for that long? Zero. So yeah, outside of those three categories, I think there's a lot of discussion about infrastructure and all the headaches. But before you even get to the how, the point I guess we're making here is you have to ask the why. And if you can't answer the why.
The one thing I'll add here, though, is that these games, I mean, we've now gotten to see a few of the types of games that are going to work or have worked historically. Like EVE Online, what they're building is fantastic. It's worked in traditional gaming, and it was just the most obvious candidate to build into Web3. But honestly, like, who knows where the next piece of innovation is going to come from? Like, nobody could have seen Axie taken off. Like, there was no real. If you thought in terms of traditional gaming, is Axie going to take off? This like weird tokenomics model, weird little system that they were creating there. Nobody expected that. So I think there is some value to the experimentation being done right now, and who knows? Like, I'm excited to be surprised, and it'll be. I'll be very glad to see that there's another category that we didn't even come up with here.
Yeah, to that point, and this is going to be a good lead into the how. I've started to look at the fully on-chain gaming space as well, and here the idea is, can we make it so all the state and all the kind of state transitions are fully on-chain, which is perhaps the most interesting thing because it incorporates trustlessness as a core design primitive for games, and that's where blockchain really unlocks an entirely new category of design. My personal view on that space is we're probably several years too early, but let's talk about it. Like Akshay, like how do you break down in your head the infrastructure stack today for building a Web3 game?
Yeah, so obviously different types of Web3 games out there fully across the spectrum. And first of all, the game developer just needs to decide how Web3 you're really going to be. On one hand, there's the very, very web, and a way that often people like to qualify as like the Web 2.1 type games. Like they may have an NFT that is like a skin, but that is the only part of the game that's Web3. And then on the other hand, there's the fully on-chain games, autonomous worlds. Those autonomous worlds, by the way, just a side comment, I think they're up to something interesting, the people who are building that out. I'm not quite sure yet if this is going to work or if this is just a solution in need of a problem. But it's very early. It's very R&D stage right now. I think it's very much pushing the frontier. But if we can solve a lot of the technical challenges like scaling and just the sheer number of transactions and stuff that happen on chain for these games to go, that could be something that could be a very interesting future, especially as we start developing in more and more virtual world territory for games. But going back to the original question of what sort of infrastructure you need, I mean, when you're building a game in Web3, you just have to sit down and start with a fat list of questions. You start with things like, okay, how Web3 do I want my game? Where does Web3 come into the design of the game? Like, does this game even need Web3? That's something you have to sit down and answer. As bullish as I am on Web3 gaming, not every game should be a Web3 game. You really have to think about, why does this game need to be Web3? Does this economy need a token? Do we want to have NFTs, and what assets in the game should be NFTs? And once they are there, what can the user do with it? Thinking about from a user perspective, player perspective, that this is how the player journey will go. This is how they will use these NFTs. This is how they will upgrade and continue their experience. And this is what the player's lifetime is going to be throughout this game. Once you've made that decision of, I'm going to build a Web3 game, this is how my NFTs are going to be. This is how the assets are going to be designed. This is how the tokenomics are going to work. If you have that, then you start thinking about the things like, okay, what chain am I going to choose? And a bunch of different factors of chains. That's a tough decision that every game goes through. We talk to a lot of games at the early stage who are thinking about this, like, what chain am I going to choose? They're thinking about things like scalability. They're thinking about things like gas costs. They're thinking about things like what kind of developer ecosystem and tooling exists there. A lot of these things are questions they have to answer, and that based on what they need, they pick the right chain. After that, then you start thinking about, now let's think about next level infrastructure. So right now, one of the things that people are thinking about, even after they choose a chain, is, am I going to go on the main net of the chain? Am I going to go build on an app chain with something like supernets, subnets, super chains? Everyone calls these things something different. But if you're doing that, now what infrastructure providers am I going to use? Like, who's going to provide wallets? Who's going to provide payment rails? Who's going to provide like in-game like data analytics? There's a million other pieces of infrastructure that you need here. So part of what we're trying to do at Halliday is make it super simple. We want to give game developers solutions. We want to give them solutions before they even have figured out what those questions are. And because we know at this point, we've talked to so many game developers, we've seen what types of problems they need to solve, that we can think ahead in terms of, here's what you think you need now, but here's what you're going to need 6 or 12 months from now. So why don't you think about using this solution instead? yeah, it is a challenge. It is not easy to build a Web3 game.
I think that list is notable not for its length, but by the number of things that actually aren't on that list that you still have to think about, whether you're building a Web3 game or not. Like,
And that's not even anything about building an actual game.
yeah. Also a great point. So let's start with that, right? The first question I ask when I approach a Web3 game is some of the design-related questions, right? Like going back to the Diablo 3 experience, the reason the open economy auction house failed in that context was if you could just buy the same gear that you grinded for like a week for like $1, right? Like most people like to think that their time is worth more than $1 a week, right? And so when you kind of take all those intrinsic motivations for playing a game and you reduce it to a single dollar amount in the form of a single virtual good that's tradable, wow, you've really changed the core player experience, right? So that's probably should consume a very large portion of the infrastructure-related discussions. And then there's all the kind of like non-Web3 specific types of questions that you got to ask, like, for example, because my game is now an open economy game, have I suddenly taken myself outside of social casino space, right? Like think like a Zingo Poker or a Coin Masters, these games that make, in some cases, billions a year for completely funny money, right? You may say, why would I do that? Why would I spin a virtual slot machine at a minus 100% ROI? Well, people do. And people spend, yesterday, like, I learned that, games like MapleStory, to be, on the top ranked leaderboard, you have to, spend hundreds of thousands or even millions, right? This is a very well-known fact in a lot of the Lineage 2 type of MMO and this type of game. And so it's like, okay, the moment I make all the rewards of that game suddenly real money, what do I have to now deal with? I have to deal with the fact that I don't want to go to jail for violating gambling rules, right? I don't want to go to jail for violating loot box rules, because the arguments that game developers have traditionally made is, no, we don't have to comply with that because it's all funny money. And so the moment it's not funny money, but it's real money, what happens? You have to think about, money transmission licenses, payment processing, like all these things. And so I think that's just a kind of footnote before we kind of go more back to the Web3 infrastructure side, because, like Hilmar said something interesting in his presentation yesterday, which was he viewed a lot of Web3 as solutionizing before you have a really crisp definition of the problem statement. And I think it's very much the same for Web3 infrastructure as well, right? So I would bring it back one level higher. Instead of the first question being, oh, which blockchain are you using, right? I would have a much more user-centric approach of like, how am I going to actually get this virtual currency, right? Like you have games in Korea, like what Come To Us is doing, like what We Made is doing. None of these guys are giving you the ability to actually buy the token with $1 or dollars or local currency today, right? The user experience is go buy it on an exchange, send it to a wallet, and then have it recognized in game, right? So stuff like that. Like, so how do you think about some of these problems from a more kind of like user-centric first principles kind of way?
I mean, so a lot of these problems right now are a big reason why Web3 gaming is not really picked up. I was talking to a friend earlier today who's building a referral system for Web3 dApps and games specifically. And he was telling me that, hey, yeah, we can send people referrals to these games, but then it's going to be like connect wallet, connect to Dex, a million things, and you've lost me at this point. Like, I don't care. So you're sending all these referrals that nobody's actually clicking or doing anything with. That's the problem right now in a lot of Web3 gaming, and that some of the infrastructure, like what we're trying to build, is really trying to solve. We want to make these experiences as simple as possible, and we want to abstract away the blockchain completely. The blockchain is great. It's fantastic in terms of what you can do, the types of open economies you can build on top of it, but there's no reason we need to make a, plaster that every single place on the game. The best type of experience, as we like to say, for a blockchain game is when the user doesn't even realize it's a blockchain game. A few years from now, we hope that nobody's talking about blockchain games anymore. It's just games. And the blockchain itself, it's like, hey, what technology are you building your game with? Are you building it on Unity? Are you building it on Unreal? Are you building it with blockchain? Like these kinds of things, it fits into something like that, where it's just another standard thing. So right now, it's quite challenging. Like, I mean, you just talked about some of the problems, how complicated a process you need to create. And it's partially a result of just how many hats you need to wear as a game developer. Like, you need to be a game developer. You need to be able to raise funds. You need to be a lawyer, a money transmitter lawyer, a securities lawyer, an international trade lawyer. Like, there's so many things you need to do here. And in solving all those problems, you create this janky experience that nobody really knows how to use.
Yeah. So let's spend the last kind of 7 minutes here going one layer deeper behind some of the infrastructure you're building. So one term that's come up a lot in the last few months is account abstraction. Give us a 101 on what the hell that means and what the practical difference is for users.
So for the longest time in this space, I'm going to start with this. So a very long time in this space, we've kind of viewed accounts and wallets as the same thing. And when we think of accounts, everyone thinks of a MetaMask or an EOA, as we call it. The problem here is that we sort of just stopped iterating on that once MetaMask came out. We never really considered what else can we do, how else can we make this better. Account abstraction is the latest technology in this space, which, as the name implies, is abstracting away a lot of the complexities when you want to create an account, when you want to do transactions. So with account abstraction, it's this idea that people coming from a very non-Web3 background, a very traditional background, can just jump into Web3 experiences quite easily. Now, so this is just a new standard on Ethereum, ERC-4337, and the standard exists. There's a bunch of cool features of it, but what we're doing at Halliday is we're really taking the standard and building a very game-specific smart account solution. So at Halliday, what we're doing with the Halliday smart accounts is saying, okay, you're a player coming into the game. You shouldn't even need to know there's a blockchain or anything happening. You come into the game, you put in an email or like Gmail password or something to log in, and with that, poof, everything is done. You can log in with socials. In fact, one of the latest things we're working on right now that we're about to release soon is login and sign transactions with just Face ID. Like, you don't even need to have any form of identification there or any form of login. It's just, I want to create an account. Let me pull up my phone, scan my face, done. If I want to sign a transaction, it scans my face and I'm done. That's it. That's how seamless it is. Social login is one of those core components. Another core component of what we're building is gasless experiences. Every time you play a game right now and you want to do anything on-chain, you have to go deal with gas. And it could be as simple as I just want to do the most simple on-chain transaction, the most simple on-chain action, but I'm going to have to go, let's say it's a game on Polygon. It's probably going to take a cent to do it. But to go get that 1 cent worth of Matic token, I'm going to have to go on-ramp into crypto, go use a DEX, figure out how to do all this, and then I can pay that transaction. Instead of that, what if we could just make the experience gasless? Most of the times these days, the developer is more than happy to pay that 1 cent on behalf of the user if you can save them 10 minutes of trouble. That's what gasless experiences are, just giving the developer that ability and saving the time for the user and making sure that they don't just leave the app, which is the worst thing that can happen for the developer. Last thing here that we're doing is things like session keys, automatic transaction signing. So this is especially good for mobile games, where on a mobile game, every time you want to play a Web3 game and sign anything, you have to go switch to the MetaMask app, sign it, and then go back. And the whole experience is a back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's awful. What we're doing with session keys is you just click sign transaction once, and for the next 30 minutes or hour, as the user is playing games, every transaction just auto-signs. So you don't have to do anything further from there. Everything's automatic. This is one side of what we're doing, just making the experience seamless for players. On the other hand, we're trying to think about what if we could redefine accounts as a whole? As I was saying earlier, we've been locked into this old thinking of what a wallet should be, but accounts in Web3 are very similar to browsers in Web2, and we've evolved significantly over the years of what a browser should be. What can an account be? What if on an account we could do more than just store, send, and receive assets? What if we could delegate access to assets to people? What if we could build organizations and guilds and companies and groups of people who can share assets and have different sets of rights over certain forms of assets? What if you can do things like in gaming specifically, things like subscriptions, things like battle passes, things like trials, things like rentals. One thing I hear consistently when we're talking to a bunch of games is that every time they want to add a new feature in their games, so say something as simple as a rental protocol, it takes months to go build that. You have to code the smart contracts, you have to get it audited, and it's a massive, massive pain. What we want to do with our account infrastructure is it's just a flip of a switch. We're trying to basically upgrade wallets to like smart accounts in the same way that Bitcoin in a way was upgraded to Ethereum. It's a generalized computer. We want to make generalized accounts, which developers can use to do whatever they need. They can, within certain bounds, within those certain rules, make whatever form of user experience that they need to. So that's what we're building at Halliday. That's what we're trying to solve for game developers.
Can you elaborate a bit on how the recovery process works?
For if you lose your password and all?
Yeah.
So it depends if it's a social login. Social recovery is quite easy. It's built on like a MPC. So if you, let's say you lost your Gmail password, you can just go ahead to Gmail and reset that. But with that's one of the things that's especially cool about account extraction is that signatures can be abstracted. It doesn't need to be the traditional ECDSA signatures that are required for MetaMask or required for traditional wallets. We can have all these new forms of social signatures, like what we're talking about, like passkeys here. So social recovery is just a very easy problem to solve, and you don't need to worry. Your user doesn't need to worry anymore about like, oh shoot, what if I lose my seed phrase? All my assets are gone.
Got it. Cool. Well, we have 2 minutes left, so I guess we'll open it up for any questions before we wrap up here. In the absence of any questions, I'll leave you with a question, which is, what do you think is the most important part of the Web3 or open economy infrastructure stack that you guys aren't tackling, but which is such a core problem statement for the user that until it's solved, we're not going anywhere in this space?
I like to think we are tackling all the fun ones. I think I wouldn't say, I won't say something about the infrastructure stack necessarily, but what I will say is one of the core things that isn't being tackled right now, the questions is, how are we going to attract a lot of the traditional game players and what kind of experiences are they looking for? Like there's a very grand vision of what we're trying to build within in Web3 gaming. Like we are all very excited about building these virtual worlds, digital civilization, and the types of games we were talking about earlier, like Nexon, like EVE Online, these types of games where it's like MMO type experiences. But how are we going to build that first one? And where is that first game? Where is that first experience that people get really excited by? Where is that going to come from? And what's needed to build that? I think there's a lot of people that are thinking about this. There's a lot of people experimenting with different types of games. But what's that going to be? I don't have an answer for just yet.
Cool. Well, thanks for the time. How can people find you after?
Yeah, check us out on halliday.xyz. We're at Halliday HQ on Twitter. Definitely reach out if there is anything we can help with. If you're a game developer, if you just like to chat about developing games in Web3 or Web3 infrastructure, always love meeting game developers or others in the space.
Great. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm GalaxyRTK on Twitter. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for these gentlemen to